as put forth by the president himself on Air Force One last evening, is there could be any number of nations who would be, quote unquote, next on the list, Greenland included. How do you describe this moment that we're in?
Well, thank you so much for having me. You know, this is a perilous moment. It's a moment in which the President of the United States has put the American people in a very difficult position. My constituents here in New Hampshire, we're feeling a lot of pain right now because we're in the midst of a genuine, full-blown affordability crisis. People have lost their health care. They're struggling. They're having to make the most painful choices that a person could have to make, choosing between paying their rent and keeping the heat on. It's this president has shifted focus in a way that is dizzying and very concerning, I think, to every American.
But, Congresswoman, what do you make of the administration's argument that this is going to be good for the world order? In their words, when we're talking about taking down a narco-terrorist who's now serving trial in New York, have you heard from your constituents that they've been in favor of something that we've heard both sides of the aisle applaud, at least maybe not how the administration went about it, but the end goal of what was achieved?
Look, I think the president and the administration have a lot of questions to answer about what the goals really are here and what comes next. And that is the question that's top of mind for me. When the president was asked this question on Saturday, what comes next, he said that the United States would be running Venezuela. Look, Nicolas Maduro was a dictator. He is a thug. He was a total disservice to the people of Venezuela. I have no higher priority than keeping the people of New Hampshire safe. And that means cracking down on transnational cartels that are fueling overdose deaths here in my state and across the country. But this administration, at so many critical junctures, has shown a fundamental unseriousness about actually tackling criminal cartels and the drivers of American overdose deaths. Just a few weeks ago, President Trump pardoned the former president of Honduras, who was directly responsible for sending hundreds of tons of drugs into this country. Why did he do that? Well, Roger Stone asked him to. And this is what we're seeing from this president and this administration. I served for years at the Justice Department. We have some of the most extraordinary investigators and prosecutors who have been doing fantastic work for our country. And what we've seen under this administration is a real attack on some of the lifelines and the most fundamental and important work that we do in cracking down on transnational cartels. So it's very hard for me to take seriously this one of the several justifications that this administration has put forward for what they're doing in the Western Hemisphere and what they're doing in Venezuela.
Well, Congresswoman, you turned to domestic politics pretty quickly when I first asked you about what had happened in Venezuela. And so I want to get to that a little bit more, because lawmakers like yourself are all coming back into town now with a deadline that you're facing at the end of the month. We already went over the so-called Obamacare cliff, but there's a funding deadline at the end of January that might be worth our attention here. There have been several attempts at passing War Powers Acts. It looks like the Senate will force another this week, and most expect it will fail. But there's also concern about the argument over Venezuela becoming a real problem in negotiations over defense appropriations, and that, in fact, could help us slide into another shutdown. Is that on your radar?
You know, I've been on the job now for 1 year and 2 days, and from the moment that I was sworn in, from before even starting, I've been focused on how we actually get into a place where we've got the right rules of the road and a plan in place to make sure that we don't see a government shutdown. We should never have had the longest government shutdown in American history. We had a Speaker of the House who has continually obstructed productive negotiations that can and should be occurring to prevent a future government shutdown. We've got common sense bipartisan legislation to prevent that from happening. But at bottom, what we really need are people of good faith who are sitting on our Appropriations Committee and who are going to do the basic job of making sure that we are funding this government. On the Armed Services Committee, one of the things we've heard from literally every person who's come before our committee is that one of the most dangerous things that we can do for our national security is to continue to operate on continuing resolutions, which undermine the very fundamentals of our national defense. So this is a huge priority for me this month before the January 30th deadline. This week, though, we do have finally the opportunity to force a vote in the House of Representatives to extend the ACA tax credits, which are a lifeline for millions of Americans and which are a genuine lifeline for critical access hospitals here in my district. The Speaker, as he has been in actually the fundamentals of budgeting, he's been a complete impediment to common sense solutions to preventing massive spikes in healthcare costs for millions of Americans. And it's just absolutely unacceptable.
Congresswoman, has a date been set yet for that vote? And is there any momentum that you've heard that this is actually something that could make its way through both chambers? Because we did hear from the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, earlier today, who said he doesn't think that the government's going to shut down over health care.
Well, look, with respect to the tax credits and the common sense solution that we've got, the bipartisan solution to extend the ACA tax credits, we had 218 members of the House of Representatives before the end of the year last year, and the Speaker refused to allow this bill to come for a vote. We are gonna continue to press the case this week. We've had to use every procedural avenue, including a discharge petition, which has really been the way that we've been able to make law on a bipartisan basis in the House, and that has been a workaround that we've had to adapt to, and that's what we'll continue to do, to find and create the common ground and the pathways to actually get things done. That's what brought me to this job. That's what brings me to this work, and that is my singular focus.